Hello? Okay, there we go. All right. Today I will be reading a portion of Hammer of Demons. Hammer of Demons is notable because Ben Counter just writes demons so well. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I guess you could say that the devil is in the details. He just makes it so fun, okay? Because they're all just terrible freaks. Every one of them is terrible in a different way, and the way they change people it's just baffling. So yeah, he writes the effects of demons on people, and then he just writes up what the demons are. Today, on today's wacky episode, I will also be playing Glutton versus Gluttony, where I will be drinking massive quantities of cheap gas station liquor. This bottle right here, $5. Gonna give me gut rot. We're gonna see how far I can go before I become incoherent. Unfortunately, I will most likely become incoherent for earlier than I'll realize I am incoherent. So, without further ado, Hammer of Demons. It is the 41st millennium. For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and master of a million worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. He is a rotting carcass with writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. He is the carrion lord of the Imperium, for whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day, so that he may never truly die. The floor and walls of the Medicaid bunker were painted dark green, so the blood just looked like dark water pooling under the beds. He's at the back, said the Medicaid orderly. Her face was gray with fatigue, but her eyes were alert. Then let's hurry, said Colonel Daltharkin. Daltharkin. The Medicaid led the colonel between the rows of beds, each with its wounded man lolling, semi-conscious with sedation, or grimacing between the rows of beds, each with its wounded man lolling, semi-conscious with sedation, or grimacing as an orderly bent over his wounds. Some of them managed to nod or even salute to the colonel as he walked by, and he returned their greetings with a moment of eye contact. Most of the conscious ones, though, were focused on the man who followed the colonel. He was huge and armored in gunmetal, something the Hathrans had never seen before they had come to this world. Indeed, he was someone very few of them had ever seen up close. He seemed to take up what little room remained in the bunker. 3 came in, the Medicaid continued, casting a curious glance at the armored figure behind the colonel. 1 made it. We had to burn the others. Her manner was short and efficient, as if all her compassion had been drained away. Colonel Daltharkin didn't have to ask how the survivor was doing. At the back of the bunker, there was a row of beds with mesh insect nets, useless in the Arctic climate of Sarthis Majoris, but enough to create a barrier between the covering and the most severely wounded men, the ones who hadn't realized they were dead, and the sight of suffering around them. The patrol survivor was going to die, and soon. If it matters, he's in no condition to talk, continued the Medicaid. Is he conscious? In and out. That'll do. The Medicaid pulled back the netting from a bed at the back of the bunker. The smell of burnt meat and hair welled up from the bed. Arse to the golden throne, swore the trooper who lay there. I really must be in trouble. Trooper Slohane? Yes, sir. Officer present. Sorry, sir. Can't salute. Trooper Slohane was missing most of his lower jaw. It had been replaced with a temporary prosthetic that was just mobile enough to allow him to talk. The face on the damaged side was raw meat. A wadded bandage was taped over the ruins of one eye. The jacket of his fatigues had been cut away, and a wound swallowed up most of his chest. A transparent slab of gel skin lay over the wound to staunch the bleeding, but the injury was far too severe for Slohane to be saved. There was so much blood on the floor and soaked into the bed that blood loss would get him even if his organs held out. Slohane's eye focused on the shape towering over the colonel. For a moment, he didn't seem to focus, as if the figure was too big to fit within the confines of the bunker. Slohane smiled with what remained of his mouth. You! I never thought I'd actually get to be face to face with one of you. A space marine. Well, when I was a child, I thought you were just a story. Justicar Alaric stepped forward. In full power armor, he was almost twice the height of a man. His armor was ornate steel, adorned with the devotional texts, picked out in gold, and one massive shoulder pad bore the heraldry of a black and red field with a single starburst, the symbol of a book pierced by a silver sword, and adorned the other shoulder. Alaric wore no helmet, and his face seemed too human for the size and ornamentation of his armor, even with his scars and the service stud on his forehead. He had a halberd in his hand, not long enough to scrape the bunker ceiling, and on the back of his other hand was mounted a double-barreled storm bolter. No stories, Alaric said simply. We are here for the same reason you are. This is a world worth saving. What did you see, trooper? Asked the colonel. Slohane arched back and coughed. The wet mass of his lungs was visible through the ruin of his chest. 6 of us went out. The captain said we were heading through the southern route to get to the foothills before nightfall. Avalanche must have come down the day before because the route was blocked, so we skirted up along the Pale Ridge. Slohane looked at the colonel. We should have turned back. The Medicae picked up a handful of the printouts that spooled out of a modern cogitator. She gave the colonel a meaningful glance. The irregular life signs on the printout meant Slohane didn't have long. Go on, trooper. Things started coming out of the ground, said Slohane. He was looking up at the ceiling. There was too much in his mind's eye to let him focus on anything real. Hands and faces. They started screaming, and then there was fire. The captain died. We had to let him go. He was melting into the ground. Tolan went crazy and started shooting. I just ran, sir. I just ran away. And then I was heading up the ridge. I was on fire, I think. These dark things were coming up through the snow. I got to the top of the ridge and kept firing. The damn lasgun was red hot. I ran back down the ridge, away from it all. I just looked back once. Alaric knelt down beside the colonel, so he was the height of a normal man. What did you see? Slohane's eye rolled around. Tears welled up. There were millions of them, he said. Millions! All standing on the other side of Pale Ridge. Men, said Slohane. And things? Huge things, monsters, waiting there like animals on the slaughterman's ramp. Then the clouds blew by stars, and the whole valley, it was covered in blood. The mountain streams that had thawed, and they were blood too. I could hear them chanting. It wasn't no language like a man might speak. It was words straight from the warp. What about artillery? Asked the colonel. Armor? I don't know, said Slohane. But there were monsters in the air too, with wings and a tower lit up in red. And him up on the battlements, like a king. Who? Said Alaric urgently, leaning down so his face was close to Slohane's. Who did you see? Slohane tried to reply, but his words came out as a painful gasp. A tear of blood ran from his remaining eye. The Medicaid dropped the printout and fiddled with the controls on the monitor. He's unconscious. He's losing blood faster than we can pump it in. You won't get any more from him. Pale Ridge, right under our bloody noses. We knew it would come to this, said Alaric. That we did. The colonel turned to the Medicae and pointed to Slohane's convulsing body. Burn him too. Of course, she replied. Oh. Alaric met up with the squad on the fortifications above the medical bunker. The night had been even colder than usual, and cloaks of ice clung to the Rock Creek battlements. Wisps of vapor rose from the pillboxes and weapon points. From beneath the Harathan, from the breath of the Harathan guardsmen huddled beneath their greatcoats. The Grey Knights were standing watch at the right of the line, where the medical bunker met the ice wall of the mountainside. The rest of the line stretched across the mountain pass, manned by the Harathan soldiers, who still stole the half-fearful glances at the Grey Knights. None of them knew what a Grey Knight was, but they had all heard of a Space Marine. Humanity's saviors, the greatest soldiers in the galaxy. A Space Marine was a symbol of the Imperium, a reminder of what they fought for. What news, Justicar? Asked Brother Halvarn as Alaric trudged through the slush of night's icefall. It's coming to an end, replied Alaric. Good, replied Brother Devorn. Devorn, along with Halvarn, had fought with Alaric, since he had first been elevated to the rank of Justicar. Where Halvarn was a bold leader, Devorn was a pure warrior. His nemesis weapon was in the form of a hammer, a rare weapon that perfectly suited Devorn's brutality. Alaric was glad to have both of them at his side on Sarthus Majoris. If Trooper Sloane's testimony had any truth to it, he would need them soon. Do we know what we're facing? Asked Brother Visicle. Not yet. Looking forward to finding out, said Devorn. Don't be too eager, replied Alaric. It's bad. The enemy must have gathered in strength since we made landfall. They're massing past Pale Ridge right now. The colonel is mobilizing every able-bodied man as we speak, and it'll happen soon. The enemy can't keep a force like that in check for long. Will the line hold? Asked Brother Thane. Thane and Visicle had been drafted in Alaric's squad after losses that had occurred on Chironia. That's not for me to say. The Rathans will decide that. We must show them how the enemy must be resisted and help lead them in their prayers. After that, the battle will fall on them. Not if we get there first, said Visicle with a smirk. While Thane had only recently earned the armor of a Grey Knight, Visicle was a veteran. The gauntlets of his power armor were permanently blackened by the flame of his incinerator, in spite of the war gear rights supposed to keep them spotless. We'll show them how it's done. Vorn nodded in agreement. Some men just fought like that, Alaric had decided. They simply threw aside all concept of failure and trusted in their training and determination to carry them through. They were, after all, Grey Knights, some of the Imperium's best soldiers, and Alaric could not help but think that way. Thane, lead the prayers, said Alaric. Our bodies are prepared, so ensure that our souls are the same. A sound reached Alaric's ears. The voices of the Imperial Guard, low and mournful, rose in one, the death song of the Harathan. Oh, let's see. This commercial break is brought to you by Beta Power. Why have alpha power when instead you could have beta power? Fate had seen fit to place Sarthus Majoris in the path of the most terrible chaos incursion since the ancient days of the Horus Heresy. The 13th Black Crusade had erupted from the warp storm known as the Eye of Terror, led by the greatest champions of the Chaos Gods. The initial campaigns had seen Cadia besieged and whole Imperial armies annihilated as they tried to stem the tide. Only the sacrifices of the Imperial Navy had kept the Black Crusade from reaching the Segmentum Solar itself. The Inquisition had made appalling decisions that not even a hard-bitten guard general would stomach, bombing guard regiments into dust for witnessing the predations of the enemy, sacrificing whole worlds to slow down the Chaos hordes, betraying Emperor-fearing citizens at every turn to buy tiny slivers of hope. The whole galactic north was mobilized to barricade the Imperial heartland against the Black Crusade. Chaos brought with it demons. The Ordo Malleus, the most secretive and warlike branch of the Inquisition, had sent unprecedented resources to the Eye of Terror. Whole companies of Grey Knights had been thrown into the cauldron of the Eye. The Eye of Terror drew in the Imperium's demon hunters, and more often than not, it spat them out mutilated, mad, or dead. Yet still they fought, because that was what it meant to be human. To fight when any sane man would say the fight could not be won. Sarthus Majoris supplied fuel to the Imperial Navy. Its refineries turned the radioactive sludge in the planet's mantle into the lifeblood of the Segmentum's battle fleet. Maybe that was why a fleet of chaos ships, ancient things shaped like filth-encrusted daggers, was diverted to invade Sarthus Majoris. Or perhaps the millions of colonists huddled in the refinery cities were simply too tempting a sacrifice to the dark gods. Either way, if chaos took Sarthus Majoris, the engines of Imperial battleships would fall silent, and dozens more chaos ships would break through the Imperial blockades. The Harthan armored cavalry were close enough to be landed on Sarthus Majoris shortly after the Chaos forces made landfall on the southern polar cap. The hurried strategic meetings confirmed that the Chaos Army's northward march would have to take them through the Icebound Pass and the towering Kiss Mountains. Once through the mountains, there was no telling which refinery city would sacrifice first. So the pass had to hold, and the Harthan armored cavalry had to hold it. Imperial commanders requested assistance from any quarter to help deliver Sarthus Majoris from the enemy. The Ordo Malleus heard these requests and performed astropathic divinations that confirmed the presence of demons among the hordes landing on the planet. In a perfect galaxy, they would have sent armies of space marines and stormtroopers led by demon hunters to crush the chaos forces on the polar cap. But the galaxy was far from perfect, and all those legions and inquisitors were spread out across 1,000 worlds threatened by the Black Crusade. The Inquisition's contribution to the defense of Sarthus Majoris consisted of Justicar Alaric and 4 Grey Knights. Movement! Movement! Cried one of the sentries. 2 kilometers. West face. The Harthan station on the wall hurried to their posts, peering into the breaking dawn light. It was running down the sides of the valleys in a thin, greasy film, turning the ice of the peaks far above an angry gold. The depths of the valley stretching southwards were still veiled in the dying light's stillness. "I see them," said one of the officers commanding the watch. He pulled magnoculars from the greatcoat and looked through them down the valley. Shapes were moving in the darkness, scrambling alongside of the mountain. A human couldn't climb like that, especially when almost naked, clad only in its own flayed skin. "Is it the big one?" asked another guardsman, a support gunner, leaning forward on the barrel of his fixed autocannon. "Might just be another sacrifice," said yet another. Most of the guardsmen believed that the chaos attacks up to that point had been deliberately mounted to sacrifice cultists and mutants beneath the Imperial guns, to seed the valley with blood and please the chaos gods. A few, more prosaically, thought the enemy was just trying to use up the Harathans' ammunition. But everyone was certain that an attack was coming, after the rumors had spread that a vast chaos horde, millions strong, was pooling behind Pale Ridge. "Guns up! Men to your stations!" cried the officer. Sirens sounded as guardsmen swarmed onto the battlements. The few who were sleeping jumped from their beds and were pulling their scarves around their faces as they emerged into the freezing dawn. Their breath formed heavy clouds, rolling between the battlements. The attacks had come nightly. The enemy had thrown handfuls of men at them. It was simpler to call them men. The officers called them cultists, a useful catch-all for the mutated, heretic, and insane that made up the bulk of the Chaos Army. Their bodies, frozen solid, were dark red smudges beneath the latest snowfalls. Some of them had been robed madmen who chanted in inhuman tongues. Others were scrambling things that had presumably been human before their skins were removed and nailed back onto their wet, red bodies and scraps. Some of those that had made it to the walls, and most of the Harathan wounded in the Medicaid bunker or in the grim, frozen heap of bodies on the fortification's northern side, were the result of those leaping, screaming creatures. Sometimes red lightning had struck from the heavens, searing men into charred meat. Sometimes soldiers had gone mad and killed their brother soldiers, and no one could tell if it was some sorcery of the enemy or old-fashioned battle psychosis. Many of the patrols sent out to locate enemy had not returned, nor had crawled back burned, mutilated, or mad. The enemy wanted the Harathan line bruised and tender, its teeth ground down, its men exhausted, and guns well worn. There had been plenty of death already. The gods wanted a spectacle. "You there!" yelled Colonel Daltharkin at the closest officer. He stormed out of the command bunker. "Get some men to that fire point, and get engineers up here in the battle cannon. The damn things jam every 3 rounds." Guardsmen were scrambling to their posts, including the tanks iced at the ends of the line. The Harathans were an armored regiment, but the fuel had frozen in the engines of their Lehman Russ battle tanks, and those that still worked were dug into the ice to be used as fixed gun points. "Colonel," said Alaric as he pushed through the soldiers, now thronging up to the battlements, "where do you need us?" "Hold the line," said the colonel. In truth, he had no right to give orders to Grey Knights attached as they were to the Inquisition, but protocol was less important here than the actual battle plan. If they get explosives between the medical bunker and the valley wall, they can blast the breach. That's what you have to stop. The colonel's features softened for a second. The man underneath the soldier showed through for a moment. "Good luck, Justicar," he said. Colonel Daltharkin, alone among the Harathans, had some understanding of what the Grey Knights really were and why they had been sent to Sarthus Majoris. "The Emperor is with us," replied Alaric as he turned to join his men. The Grey Knights were already in position. The medical bunker was on the extremist right of the line. The enemy would pool. The enemy would pool here, forced wide by the crossfires of Rathan guns, and sooner or later a cultist would throw a demo charge or a bundle of grenades into just the right place to shatter the ice and blast the gap wide enough for men to pour through. Then the line would be surrounded, and everyone defending it would die. Except the Grey Knights were there. As far as the Harathans were concerned, nothing could destroy them, as long as there were Space Marines still alive to fight. It's not another sacrifice, said Brother Visical. They're holding back. Not for long, said Alaric. The enemy isn't that patient. They'll hit us here and now. Just a car, said Thane. It's the blood god, isn't it? Alaric glanced around at the youngest Grey Knight. Thane was right. The symbols, the chanting, the crazed desperation to dye the blood god's work was present here on Sarthus Majoris. However, enough Grey Knights had died in battle through thinking they understood the enemy, and Alaric was not going to be one of them. Chaos has infinite faces, said Alaric. We won't know which one it is until we look it in the eye. Armor, said Halvern, pointing down the darkness at the southern end of the valley. The ice-cold sunlight was picking out ridges of snow and rock amid the shadows, and as Alaric followed Halvern's gaze, you could see vehicle holes, corroded and barnacled, like ancient creatures from the seabed, lumbering through the seething darkness. Then this is it, said Alaric. Thane? I am the hammer, began Brother Thane, because in Alaric's squad, the newest recruit led the others in their prayers. I am the point of his spear. I am the gauntlet about his fist. The drone of prayer joined the faint hiss of the wind through the imperial lines. The Harathans were praying too, old war songs from their homeworld of endless plains and violet skies. In reply, the sky overhead turned purple, then black, then red. Clouds heavy with blood rolled across, and the valley was bathed in deep rust red, the color of dried blood. The ridges of the mountains were picked out in scarlet. A sudden flash of red lightning burst overhead, and for a split second, Alaric took in the scene revealed at the southern end of the valley. Tangles of limbs, heaving masses of robed bodies, lumbering contraptions like ancient metal spiders, and a tower carved from frozen blood, with an armored figure leaning from the battlements. Even that briefest glimpse somehow conveyed an infinity of arrogance and evil. Arrogance and... Okay, good. Even the wind changed. It was drumming against the battlements in a terrible rhythm, carrying with it voices speaking a language that burned the ear. They're praying, said Halvern. It's not prayer, replied Bourne bleakly. They're begging. They want their god to be watching when they die. The Hrathan prayers rose in competition with the heretic drone. Dane's voice rose as the wind battered more blasphemies against the imperial lines. The wind was hot now, stinking of old blood and sweat, and slowly the darkness was creeping forwards. The horde was hundreds of thousands strong, deformed and insane, robed or stripped naked, even of their skins. Some carried guns or knives, while others wielded blood-stained bones of their fingers as sharp blades. Alaric saw a war machine anchoring the horde. Its pitted hull was held up by four mechanical legs, and it waddled through the melting snow like a fat metal spider. Banners held over the horde bore symbols of stylized skulls and parchments of flayed skin, carved with bloody prayers. Mutants twice the height of a man were whipped ahead of the horde. Their torsos were pierced by iron spikes, on which were mounted the heads and hands of fallen Harathan soldiers, and these walking trophy racks glowed like cattle as the cultists drove them forward. The blood from thousands of self-inflicted cuts stained the snow and the valley sides before them. It was as if the valley was a bleeding wound. The Chaos Army, a welling up of gore rising to drown the Harathans in its madness. The sun of Sarthus Majoris struggled to shine down through the gathering clouds, figuring its own battle in a sky dirtied by the sight of flapping creatures encircling overhead. Let us be his shield, as he is our armor, Thane continued. Let us speak his word as he fuels the fire of our devotion. Let us fight his battles, as he fights the battle at the end of time. And let us join him there, for duty ends not in death. All along the line, the Harathans were taking up their firing positions. The battle cannon swiveled to point at the center of the horde, icicles shattering from its massive barrel as it moved. Flares up! Yelled an officer, and several bright flares were fired to land in the snow between the line and the advancing enemy. Thick plumes of green and red smoke curled up. They marked the furthest accurate range of a lasgun, the line beyond which an enemy could not be permitted to advance without having to wade through las fire as thick as rain. The battle cannon fired, rocking back in its mounting above the line. The battlement shook. Shards of ice fell from the mountainsides. Even after weeks on the line, Harathan soldiers flinched at the appalling sound. A gray tongue of snow and pulverized rock lashed up in front of the horde, carrying body parts with it, sending out a shockwave through which packed bodies as cultists were thrown to the ground by the impact. Yet the horde advanced all the faster, the front ranks breaking into a run. Alric took his position behind the battlements. Brother Halvern was beside him. If Alric fell, Halvern would take command of the squad, and Alric could think of no one he would rather have. They're getting close, said Alric. They won't run. We'll have to take them face to face. Visical, that means plenty of fire. It would be an honor, said Visical. The pilot flame of incinerator flickered, ready to ignite the blessed promethium in the weapon's tanks. The fuel had been prayed over that very night, and the Emperor implored to manifest his will through the holy flame. Fire burned the enemy's flesh, but faith burned its soul, and faith was the weapon of choice for a gray knight. The horde reached closer. The stench of it was choking. The tower of frozen blood was visible to all, and it was warping, its front folding down like an opening jaw to form a flight of steps. A man in black armor, lacquered in red, descended from the battlements to the ground. He carried a two-handed sword, with a blade as long as he was tall. He was noble and arrogant, his face so pale and angularly handsome that it looked like it had been cut from the ice. The warrior was as tall as a space marine, and carried with him an air of such cruelty and authority that it took a conscious effort not to kneel before him. The horde parted as he descended. Hulking warriors in rust-red plate armor gathered in a cordon around him. The tower was still well beyond lasgun range, but the Lord of the Chaos host was obvious, like a beacon in the horde. See him? Said Halvern. Yes, said Ulrich. The guard can't take him, said Brother Dvorn. It's up to us. For now, Dvorn, we help hold the line. The horde reached the first of the marker flares. At this range, Aura could see their faces, buried under scars or masks of blood, or just so twisted with hatred that there was nothing human left. Open fire, yelled the colonel. and the air in front of the fortifications was streaked with lasfire. The front ranks of cultists were riddled, fat crescents of laser lashing off arms and slicing bodies open. Billows of steam rose up the snow and ice, where they were vaporized. The sound was immense, like reality itself ripping under the fury. The battle cannon fired again, but its roar was almost lost among the gunfire, the explosion of smoke and gore, just a punctuation mark amid the slaughter. Alric took aim and fired. The Grey Knights around him did the same. A Space Marine's aim was excellent, and he picked out the individual shapes of heads and torsos among the confusion, and spat explosive bolts into them. Where the bolts detonated, puffs of blood and bone showered. Alric fired in bursts, picking out a cultist and blasting him apart. The Grey Knights chewed a hole into the end of the Chaos line like a bloody bite mark, and within moments cultists were clambering over the ruined bodies of their dead. However, the front ranks were just weak-willed fodder for the guns. The true power of the army followed them, ensuring the Harathans used up ammunition and time, killing the scum herded in the firing line. The tide drew closer. The rhythm became frantic. Trigger fingers spasms. The trigger fingers spasming as the Harathans sprayed rapid fire into the mass of men swarming towards them. A war machine rose through the fire, its guns opening up, as last fire rained off it in showers of sparks. "Physical, they're in range!" shouted Alric, relying on the squad's vox link to carry his voice over the din. Brother Vesicle leaned between the battlements, his incinerator aimed down the steep slope of the fortifications. The horde swarmed faster, chewed up and riddled with lasburns and bolter fire, but still numbering countless thousands. Their hands and feet were bloody from tearing on the ice, pale, frostbitten limbs reached from tattered red robes as they scrambled to get purchase on the fortification wall. The skinless ones leapt over the cultists in front, agile as insects. Alric looked into the eyes of one of them. They were lolling back and blank. There was nothing human left there. All along the Imperial line, with a million voices raised in the scream, the Blood God's army hit the wall. Just as I promised. Mr. Bin, you can always count on Bin Counter to just deliver the freaks. I mean, I didn't say it like that, but yeah, he just has such a fun variety of freaks that populate his little worlds. They're so fun. The guys that have their skin restapled back onto them. I mean, that's just ingenuity right there. I wouldn't have come up with that, I don't think. That's just particularly horrifying. But yeah, just the emphasis on the lost and the damned being herded into the gunfire. I mean, there's just so many implications for me to consider that right now. Just, because they all thought that they were going to like some oasis or something, or I don't know, like yeah, some blood oasis or something. I don't know, or maybe they actually knew. I don't know. That maybe that's worse. Maybe they weren't even. Maybe they didn't even have to be lied to. They just wanted the chance to be shot at. How does Justicar Alric and his friends deal with this horde of freaks? "For the Emperor!" yelled young Brother Thane as he sliced a screaming robed killer in two with his halberd. The cultist's twin blades clattered to the rockcrete of the fortification as Thane kicked out and knocked another from the parapet. Autogun fire spinged off the Grey Knight's armor as he swept the battlement clear, the arc of his halberd blade taking off a hand, then a head. Another blast of sacred flame washed the battlements clear. A once human shape, now hunchbacked and many-armed, reared up and screamed, cloaked in flame. It collapsed, skin and muscles boiling away. "The dead," said Brother Halvern. "They're climbing over the dead." Halvern was right. The Grey Knight's guns and Visical's incinerator had killed so many so quickly the cultists were piling up to the bottom of the wall, high enough for the killers behind them to clamber up. They were on the wall now, fighting each other to die by the Grey Knight's hands. Along the wall, huge mutants clambered up onto the battlements and were fighting within the Harathans. Alric saw one of the guardsmen thrown from the wall by a deformed giant, and another having his brains dashed out by a foul creature with weeping skin and giant crab claws. A mutant fell from the wall, chest flaming from last fire, and crushed the cultists below him. The battle cannon fired again, almost point blank, throwing Harathans from their feet and showering them with earth and body parts. But it was not enough. Cultists were making it to the walls to lay into the Harathans with guns and blades. Halvern's halberd. That's awesome. Halvern's halberd took the arm off a feral warrior with woad painted skin before he ducked back below the battlements to shelter from the fire of the closest war machine. Too many? He asked. Too many, agreed Alric. Then it's ours to win. Alric looked around at his oldest comrade. The line cannot hold, not against this. Be ready to take command. Why? Because I might not come back. Justicar, my brothers need what the Emperor needs. They need victory. Standing back and letting the enemy kill us will not win that victory. It is up to us, which means it is up to me. This is a Justicar's responsibility. Can I count on you? Of course, Justicar, always. Then we need to get to the center of the walls. Open up a path for me through this rabble. Alvern paused, just for a half second. He stood up to his full superhuman height, holding his halberd up so the squad could see. Brothers, he yelled above the din of battle. Forward, down the line! Visical was first up, spraying the blessed flame along the battlements, stretching westwards. Cultists screamed in the fire. Thane cut them down with his sword, his power armor protecting him as he strode through the burning fuel. They loomed from every side to the fire and smoke, and each scarred face was met by a sword or a halberd, crackling with the harness power of a Grey Knight's mind. Alric felt bones fracturing under his halberd, and he saw wet ruins opened up and enemy torsos from a storm bolter. He barely had time to think. He was a space marine, a Grey Knight, created almost whole to be a killing machine. Every fatal movement was hardwired into him, as if machine spirit guided him, as if the Emperor himself was controlling his actions. However, a space marine was not a machine. He was driven by passions that a normal man could not understand. The obscenity leading this horde had to be destroyed. It was the thought that drove Alric on. Thane wrestled a giant mutant as they went. Something so foully warped that there was barely any human left in it at all. A leathery winged creature stooped down to snatch Alric off the wall. Alric snatched it instead, crushing its throat in his fist while he tore its wings off and threw it into the fire, still slathering over the battlements behind him. Here, said Alric, break through them. Harathans were dying all around. The Chaos Horde had forced the walls in a dozen places, and knots of combat were erupting everywhere. An explosion tore a massive chunk out of the battlements on the left side of the line, and the horde surged forward. A war machine walking relentlessly over the slope of the rubble, impaling guardsmen on its mechanical talons. And there were demons. They were red-skinned and hideous, leaping amid the carnage, wielding swords of black iron that glowed and smoldered. Damn you! Shouted a voice that Alric recognized as Colonel Daltharkin. Hold your post, Grey Knights. The flank will fall. Get back to your post! Alric caught sight of the colonel, covered in burning demon's blood, wielding a sword and plasma pistol, surrounded by bodies of friend and foe. He was a tough and unrelenting servant of the Emperor. The Imperium would miss him. Alric ignored his words and pressed on. The champion of chaos was the key. Chaos adored its champions as much as it despised everything else. It granted particularly foul-hearted men and women with the power to command their forces, the authority to speak with their gods' own voices. The imperial line could not hold the enemy. It would barely make a dent in the vast force that had landed to claim Sarthus Majoris. It had, however, achieved a goal that, though the guardsmen did not know it, was every bit as valuable to the Imperium. It had brought Alric and his Grey Knights face to face with the champion who represented the dark gods on this world. How clever! Oh. Use the 13th hand, said Duke Vanillator. Duke Vanillator. Venalator. Duke Venalator. Yeah, there we go. Venalator. Duke Venalator. They're way better. Use the 13th hand, said Duke Venalator. His voice was loaded with disdain, for the 13th hand were the lowest dregs of his army. One of Venalator's heralds, black armor welded to his weeping skin, blew a long note from its war horn. The 13th hand, hunched subhuman creatures dressed in rags, hurried forward for the honor of dying at the wall. The battle was going as planned. If any truly human emotion could be ascribed to Duke Venalator's, it could be said that he was happy with it. By the time the regiments of proper soldiers reached the front, the battle would be over, and the refinery cities of Sarthus Majoris would be Venalator's. A messenger descended on tattered wings of bloody skin.
My lord,
it slurred.
Their flank has fallen. The defenders have abandoned their posts.
Cowards, sneered Venalator. Their skulls are not fit for the brass throne.
They were from the corpse god's legions,
said the messenger. Astartes, Venalator's perfect pale brow furrowed. They would not run. The pit of Vanalator's mind dragged up memories from a time when he had been a man. It was a weak and shameful part of his existence, before the blood god had found him. That man recalled that Space Marines were guardians of the Imperium, the last line against all horrors, soldiers who would never flee, not even with Vanalator himself, bearing down on them. Close order, yelled Vanalator. His sword was in his hand, and his huge blade shining with a red-tinged dawn. Now, shields up, give no quarter! He saw them among the carnage, silver-armored figures picked out in scarlet flame. They had not abandoned the right of the line out of fear. They had left their posts to effect the only victory they could gain from Sarthus Majoris. They thought they were going to kill him. Duke Vanalator laughed. They had absolutely no idea what the blood god had made from that man. He looked upon the throne of flaming brass and knelt at the foot of the Skull Mountain. He had tasted the blood of Khorne himself. No Space Marine was fit to die beneath his blade, which was a shame because they would die very soon. Vanalator saw one of the Space Marines run at the edge of the wall, behead a cultist without breaking stride, and leap off the wall, heading directly for Vanalator. Vanalator felt every muscle in his warp-blessed body tense, and hoped that this one would at least give him a worthwhile fight. Inebriation at 40%. Equalizing toxins with other toxins. Oh. The battlefield whirled around as the battlefield whirled around Alric as he fell. He could hear the voices of his battle brothers and feel the heat ripping off the chains of bolter fire that followed him down. He hit hard enough to crush a cultist beneath him. Alric plunged a foot down through the mess to get his footing, and the stinking subhuman creatures were on him. Filthy nails raked at his armor, trying to prise between the armor plates or drive claws into his eyes. Alric swept his halberd around in a brutal arc. He forged forwards, every sweep of his halberd battering back the deformed bodies, pressing in on every side. A huge mutant reared up over him, carrying a rock in his paws to crush him. A stream of bolter fire battered his head into pulp, and it collapsed. Alric glanced back to see Halvern aiming, the muzzle of a storm bolter still flaming. The cultist gave way before him, and Alric kicked the last one aside. In front of him now stood the warrior in black armor, as tall as Alric himself, a wall of steel. Its shield bore the symbol of an 8-pointed star, and its spear was tipped with a huge sharpened fang. The warrior lunged, but Alric turned his spear away, spun around and shattered his shield with the butt of his halberd. He squared his feet and drove the blade of the halberd into the warrior's face, dropping the tip in the last moment, so it plunged into the hollow rock between neck and chest. Hot blood sprayed, and the warrior fell to his knees. There were other warriors on either side, forming a circle around Alaric's target. Alaric half stumbled in the circle. This was his only chance. This planet could not get another shot at survival. If the Chaos Horde continued to march under this leader, Sarthas Majoris would fall. The gods had seen fit to send Sarthas Majoris a champion of such prescience. A champion of such presence that Alaric felt it forcing him back. His armor was impossibly intricate, covered in images of heaps of skulls. Around a burning throne, the champion's face was the very image of arrogance, pale and perfect, with eyes like black diamonds. "Leave us," said the champion. The armored warriors around him took a step back to leave an open dueling ground around Alaric and the champion. Alaric was in low guard, his eyes fixed on the champion's blade. "A Grey Knight," said the champion with a smile. "Khorne's gaze is upon us. I shall give thanks to the warp that the Corpse Emperor sent one of his very own demon hunters to die beneath my blade." "Let me help you return the favor, then," said Alaric, his words sounding like those of a stranger. "For you will be looking upon your god soon enough." The champion smiled. His teeth were ebony black fangs. He lunged forward as his sword was like chain lightning strike that came down on Alaric. The champion smiled. His teeth were ebony black fangs. He lunged forward, and his sword was like a chain lightning strike down at Alaric. Alaric turned the sword aside, and suddenly the duel was on. The champion didn't just want blood. Blood alone was enough for the scum who threw themselves at the walls, but not for their leader. He wanted to prove his superiority. It was why he existed. It was, in proving his superiority, that the champion offered up a prowess to Khorne, the blood god. It was also Alaric's only chance of survival. The champion wanted a duel. That was what Alaric would give him. Alaric's halberd spun around faster than any normal man could move, and his head carving down the champion. In response, the champion's intricate armor opened up like a bloody flower, and tendrils of gore reached out to snare Alaric and drag him down. Alaric cut through them and dived clear of the champion's sword, slicing through the frozen earth beside him. More tendrils snaked through Alaric's arms and lifted him up to the air. Alaric ripped one arm free and aimed his stormbolter down at the champion, fixing his aim on the champion's face, still impassive with certainty of victory. The champion threw him down. Alaric hit as hard as a comet, the cultist's body splintering underneath him, and the rock-hard earth shattered. He planted a hand on the ground and forced himself up the mess of bodies, his other hand groping for his halberd. He forced the clouds from his eyes. He was battered but alive. It took a lot to fell a Grey Knight. As long as there was life in him and a weapon in his hand, victory was in his sights. The corpses were moving. The one closest to Alaric burst open like a seed pod, crimson blood flooding out. More bodies were erupting all around him and beneath him, sinking him in a swamp of gore. The champion laughed, The blood flowed up from the bodies, forming shapes like blocks of melting crimson ice. The champion stepped up onto them as they created a bleeding stairway up into the air. He stooped to pick Ulrich by the collar of his armor and held him like a scolded animal, like a sacrifice. The sword in his other hand was ready to slice Ulrich open and let his innards spill into the battlefield, and to sacrifice the corn. Ulrich kicked out and caught the champion on the side of the face. The champion reeled, and Ulrich grabbed the wrist at his throat, wrenching it around so that the champion let go. Ulrich landed on the platform of blood that had followed below them and was still rising up over the valley. Below him, he caught sight of the dark mass of cultists flowing around the right end of the line, which the Grey Knights had abandoned. The line was collapsing. The Harathans surrounded and besieged. Ulrich had sacrificed them for this chance at victory. He owed them the champion's death as surely as he owed it to the Emperor. Ulrich rolled to his feet, halberd still in hand. The champion wiped a smear of blood from the cut Ulrich had opened in his face and confronted him. Duke Vanelator avenges his insults, spat the champion. A Grey Knight avenges his Imperium, said Ulrich. The sword and the halberd flashed. High above the battlefield, on a platform of animated blood, Duke Vanelator and Justicar Ulrich fought a duel so rapid and intense that few eyes that looked up from the battlements below could not make any sense of the blur of strikes and parries. Tentacles of blood lashed around Ulrich's ankle and threw him to the bloody floor. Ulrich's leg kicked out and knocked Vanelator's reeling toward the edge. Gashes and scars opened up in Ulrich's armor. Some of them scored deep enough to draw blood. Ulrich's halberd blade ring off Vanelator's arm as the last champion of chaos turned it aside. The last moment of time, and again. Ulrich lunged for Vanelator's heart. Vanelator grabbed the high haft of Ulrich's halberd with one hand, dragged Ulrich forward, and brought an elbow down on the back of Ulrich's head, hard enough to send the world black for a moment. When Ulrich forced vision back to his eyes, he was being held in the air over Vanelator's head. Ulrich groped down, trying to force a finger under the swordman's eyes. His hand passed through the writhing wetness, a nest of squirming, bloody worms that opened up in the place of Vanelator's face. Somehow, it retained enough features to smile as it threw Ulrich down. Ulrich plummeted down towards the frozen ground between the line. He realized a split second before he landed that below him was not solid earth, but a pile of frozen Harathan dead. Weeks worth of casualties shattered beneath him. His armored bulk blasted a crater in the black-red ice. Pain slammed up through his body. His head cracked against the rock-hard chunk of a soldier's frozen corpse. The world of Sarthus Majoris seemed very far away. The voices he heard were all from a different planet entirely, a different plane, which meant he had sunk down to the earth into the one of the hells to which the Imperial Creed maintained every sinner went. Reality was sleeping away. The pain of his battered body, so familiar to a space marine, was ebbing away, and he wished it would return to prove he was still alive. The world, to his eyes, was dim and distant. The dawn was bleeding away to leave the valley dark. Something inside Ulrich reminded him that he was not supposed to simply die like this, but there was something else he had to achieve. But it slipped away even as his mind reached up to grasp it. He assumed the cry of despair was the last sound he heard. It was raised from 100 throats at once. It was so deep that it cut through the gunfire and screams of battle. It was the sound of Harathan. It was a funeral song. Alric had heard it sung over the same pile of dead in which he was now lying. They were singing their own funeral dirge. The Harathans knew they were going to die. They knew it because they had seen a space marine, the Emperor's warrior, defeated and thrown down from the heavens by the champion of the blood god. No, gasped Alric. Not here, not now. Sarthas Majoris swam back into focus. Alric was lying on his face in a pile of shattered, frozen corpses. He looked around for his halberd and saw it had landed point down, impaled in the earth a short crawl away. Alric got to his knees. He would retrieve his weapon and fight on, because that was the only way to victory, however slim the chance might be. A weight slammed down on his back, forcing him back onto his face. He fought to turn over, and for a moment the pressure was lifted. Alric rolled onto his back, and the foot came back on down on him. Duke Venelator had one foot on Alec's chest, like a hunter standing over his prey. The magnitude of his arrogance was such that even the corpses recoiled at it, the blood in them heating up and melting at Venelator's presence. Fingers of blood reached out from the corpses to lick at the boots of Venelator's armor, like the tongues of sycophants. Venelator commanded all blood, even that of his enemies. Such was the esteem in which the blood god held him. My Lord Khorne has use for you, said Venelator with a smile. He gestured at the Harathans dying on the walls behind him. Most of them are only good for fodder. Mankind provides little more than distractions for me now. However, there is much more you can do for the blood god than merely die, Grey Knight. Venelator held out the hand, and Alec felt the blood seeping from the cracks in his armor. He kicked out, trying to throw Venelator off, but his strength was gone. Ribbons of blood spiraled out, and his vision began to gray out. As Venelator drew Alaric's lifeblood out of him, chill pain filled him. Darkness fell all around, and Alaric was not too proud to scream. Oh, I'd say, yeah, fairly sizable inebriation level. Yeah, loss of coordination noted for sure. But in this round of Glutton versus Gluttony, I will say that so far I'm going strong. Glutton versus Gluttony is a single player game in which there are no winners. Because no matter what, you lose. But the thing is you get to choose how you lose. I mean, how much heart you put into it. So it's a challenge. Yeah, it's challenge mode. Okay, challenge mode. It's not a speed run. It's a challenge mode. Alaric sat down for a long time in the Cloister of Sorrows before Chaplain Durrandon approached. Just a car, said Durrandon. The Grand Masters have spoken with me of Carionia. Your faith was sorely tested. It was, said Alaric. He was sitting in the drum of a collapsed column, typical of the cloister's fallen grandeur. The day is fine, said Durrandon, indicating the magnificent sky of Titan, the vast ringed disk of Saturn hovering over the void. I shall sit with you a while, if I may. The Cloister of Sorrows was open to Titan's sky. Its atmosphere contained within visible electromagnetic fields, and for Alaric to sit there among its age-worn tableau was to allow the great eye of the galaxy to look down on him. The emperor was a part of that gaze, always examining the soul of every one of his servants. Alric felt naked and raw beneath it. I feel there is more on my mind, said Alric, than Coronia. And that is why you have come here? Replied Durndin simply. To be alone with your thoughts? Away from the war gear rites and battle songs? And if a chaplain were to happen along with whom you could share your thoughts, then so be it. Alric smiled. You are very perceptive, chaplain. It is merely the Emperor's way of using me, replied Durndin. To be a space marine requires an extraordinary man, but to be a chaplain required more. A chaplain of the Grey Knights. The rare specimen indeed, and the chapter had precious few like him. He had to administer to the spiritual needs of soldiers destined to fight the most horrible foes. The men of his flock had looked upon the warp and heard the whispers of demons, and yet, thanks to him and those who had preached him, not one Grey Knight had ever become corrupted by the enemy. Koroniev is a part of it, certainly, but I was troubled before that, ever since Lygia. Inquisitor Lygia was the bravest person Alric had ever met. The sunburst on his personal heraldry was in memory of her. She had lost her mind to the machinations of the demon prince Gargulov, but enough of her had remained pure to give Alaric the knowledge he had needed to defeat the demon. She had been executed by the Order of Malleus for her madness. Men and women like Inquisitor Lygia will always die, said Durndin. That is the way it was even before the Great Crusade. And it will continue to be so long before either of us are gone. What matters is that we know those sacrifices work towards the goal of safeguarding the human race. Do you believe she died in vain? No, chaplain, far from it. Then this galaxy seems too cruel for you. If I could not stomach the things I must see, then you will know full well I would not have been selected for training at all, said Alric, perhaps a little too harshly. I just feel there is so much for us to do, and I do not mean the battle. I have always accepted the battle will not end, but there is much more to our fight than meeting the demon with swords and guns. I have glimpsed the realities behind it all. The words of the castigator come to my mind unbidden. Gargulov wove space and time to create the events that summoned him back, and we are part of it. I will fight to the end of my days for sure. But the enemy is not just bodies to be put on the ground, it is a concept. Perhaps it is even part of us. I wish I could understand it, but I know no one can ever understand chaos without becoming corrupt. So, you do not believe our fight is futile? No, chaplain, how could I? When I have seen the results of the demon's depravity, but our fight is only half the battle, and I wonder if the other half can even be won. Durndin looked at his gauntleted hands. He was no stranger to the battlefield, and his Terminator armor, ornate gunmetal trimmed in chaplain's black, was not just for show. These hands, he said, have fought that same fight for longer than you have been alive, Justicar. And not for one moment have I ever believed it was anything but the true and righteous purpose of any human being. What you say is true, however. The demon is but one manifestation of the enemy, and its violence is but one weapon of the warp. The Inquisition battles the plans of chaos, just as we battle its soldiers. Do you not agree? How many Inquisitors have we lost? Replied Alric. Though we should not speak of it, Valinov was far from the only rogue in the Holy Orders, and he hid from us for so long. How many other heretics are wearing the inquisitorial seal? How many in the Inclandius fortress? How many directing the Grey Knights? I know it is our place to leave the thinking of the Inquisitors, but how can we trust them if they delve so deeply into the corruption? Durrandon sighed. He was an old man, and sometimes, as then, Alric had seen a reflection of those years in him. I have led Grey Knights through every trial of the mind that chaos can inflict upon them. You are not the first to doubt, Alric, and certainly not the first to glimpse the futility in the Inquisitor's task. It is not futile, said Alric, but I feel I am failing if I do not do more. The demon is a symptom, not the disease. I want to be part of the cure. I had these thoughts myself, continued Durrandon. I spoke with my battle brothers and the Grand Masters, and with the most knowledgeable inquisitors. None of them had the answer. In the end, I found the answer was myself. And what was it? You will find it yourself. You are going to the Eye of Terror, I hear. Yes, when my squad is reinforced. Good, that is your answer. The enemy's atrocities in the Eye know no bounds. And the only men like us can stop him. Think about it. In your moment of doubt, the Emperor has sent you to the bloodiest battlefields of the Imperium. That is no coincidence. Throw yourself into those battles. See the enemy. See the demon and butcher him. See the forces of chaos broken and fleeing. Take those victories and immerse yourself in them. Let victory blot out everything else. Glory in it. Then the doubt will be gone. Is that what worked for you? It did, Justicar. The enemy made a grave mistake in bringing the fight to us. Men like you will punish that mistake. This I promise you, Alric. You will become whole at the Eye of Terror. Thank you, Chaplain, said Alric. I must see to my squad. I have 2 new men, and we must pray together before we go. That is good, replied Durrandon. Your men's spirits need counsel before they witness the Eye. The chaplain looked at Saturn, deep blue and streaked with storms. Below the planet was Titan's skyline, an irregular toothed band of darkness. The whole of Titan had been turned into an ornate fortress, the moon's surface carved deep with the canyons and vaults, and many parts of it, such as the Cloister of Sorrows, had become ruined and near forgotten. I shall think here for a while. Saturn will set in an hour or so. It helps one think. Then I shall speak with you, Chaplain. Until then, Justicar. Alric stood up to leave. The way down to the half-ruined fortress beneath the cloister was long, and would give him plenty of time to consider Durrandon's counsel. And Justicar? Yes. You are not dead. That is good to know. Although it may be an idea to wake up soon. This isn't how this conversation ended. Durrandon smiled. No, it is not, but then I am not really here. I am probably elsewhere in the Eye. Perhaps I am even dead. What matters is that you are alive, and you can still do something about the situation in which you find yourself. Then what next? I cannot answer that, Alric. I'm not even here after all. I think it is very likely that your situation is not a good one. The cloister of sorrows exploded in pain. We have depleted nearly half of our gas station liquor. I would say I have sober at least to last for one more hour at the bare minimum. At the bare minimum. At least. Without a doubt. Before my incoherency rating drops to an all-time low. They're just activities you can do. I did too many activities at the wrong place. Oh, I did too many activities lately at the wrong place. Ugh, too many activities. There's such a thing as too many activities, but I mean, you can just figure out what activities work. You can learn the hard way. My activity level. Alric screamed. The pain was howling from one of his shoulders. He was hanging from his wrists, which were chained above him. There was nothing else to bear his weight. And one of his shoulders had come out of his sockets. Alric fought the pain back. He had been vulnerable for a moment, and the pain had gotten to him, as it would to a man without the mental conditionings of a gray night. His armor would normally be dispensing painkillers to his bloodstream, but he did not have his armor. He was naked. His war gear had been stripped from him. As he fought back the pain, he began to hear again. A deep noise like an angry ocean boiled beneath him, and he could hear the clanking of vast machinery, mixed in with sobs and screams from broken throats. The smell hit him. Blood and smoke, sweat, and machine oil. His mouth tasted as if it was full of iron. He could not see, but that was a problem if he could but that was a problem he could deal with in due time. He forced his feet up, pulling up on his screaming shoulder. Slowly, he pulled himself up, so his body was almost upside down. His feet found the roof of the cage he was in. He pushed down with everything he had, and he heard the bars buckling. The chain holding his hands came loose from the ceiling of the cage, and Alric crashed down onto the cage floor. He lay there for a few moments, catching his breath, gingerly testing the tendons of his shoulder. It was hurt, but it was nothing permanent. As Space Marine healed quickly, he lay on his side and let the joint slide back into place. The gunshot of pain that accompanied it was profound, but there was something triumphant in the fact that he could feel it all. Alric reached up and found a blindfold tied around his face. He pulled it away and blinked a couple times as his augmented eyes reacted to the sudden light. His cage was one of the several hundred suspended from a great iron column, down which poured dozens of waterfalls of blood. These fed the sea of blood below. No, yeah, I think I've become incoherent.